Ravina stood with her arms crossed, her silver eyes glaring at the dirty metal floor of the outpost station. She hated the smell of humans. Too sharp, too sour. Like rust and smoke mixed together, and now she had been told no, ordered to travel. With one, a human soldier, assigned as her escort across the borderlands. She hissed under her breath, her dark blue skin twitching with irritation. "This is punishment," she muttered, her long black braid swinging as she turned away from the transport. "Vehicle? You sure you're the VIP?" Jake Carter said, stepping down from the metal ramp of the crawler transport. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing old combat armor that had seen better days. He didn't smile. Didn't even greet her. Properly just checked his datapad and gave a short nod. "You must be Ravina. Alien class political transfer," he said. "Lucky me." Ravina's jaw tightened. Her voice low and sharp. "I am not lucky, and neither are you." "Human," she said. "Keep your distance." Jake raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. He simply turned and walked toward the vehicle, waving for her to follow. "This way, princess," he muttered, more to himself than to her. She heard it, of course, and her fists clenched. The war between their species had ended only months ago, but trust had not followed peace. Ravina was one of the last royal-blooded daughters of the Valari. Her people had made a deal with the humans at trade. An alliance, but not everyone liked it, especially not her. Now, she was being sent as a symbol of unity to the capital. And the humans had insisted on providing protection. Protection. She spat the word like it was poison. Inside the transport. It was cold and quiet. Jake sat in the front, hands on the steering sticks, eyes watching the dusty road ahead. Ravina sat far in the back, arms folded, refusing to even look at him. She stared out the window at the broken lands, the scars of the last battles. Burnt trees, twisted steel, and once great cities reduced to ash. After 2 hours of silence, the crawler rumbled over something hard, then jerked to a sudden stop. Ravina grabbed a handle to steady herself. Jake cursed and leaned forward, scanning the road through the cracked view shield. "Mine's been triggered," he said, tapping a few buttons. "Trap zone." Before he could react, a sharp clang echoed across the walls. The crawler's lights flickered, and smoke began to rise from the side vent. "Out. Now!" Jake shouted, grabbing his rifle and kicking open the side hatch. Ravina followed, not because she wanted to, but because she smelled danger in the air. Outside, dust swirled in the wind, and movement came from the ruins nearby. Figures appeared, bandits. Not soldiers, faces hidden, weapons drawn. "Ambush," Jake said quietly. Standing between her and the threat. "They're after you," he added, "or both of us." Ravina's heart raced, her eyes darting, calculating there were 5 of them. Maybe more in hiding. One stepped forward, a tall one with a plasma blade, hand over the girl. "Human," he growled. "You don't need to die today." Jake didn't move, his voice calm. "Neither do you," he said, raising his rifle. Ravina narrowed her eyes. Was he bluffing? Was he going to run? But then, without warning, Jake opened fire, hitting the nearest attacker square in the chest. The others scattered, returning fire, and the whole place lit up in sparks and screams. Jake took cover behind a rock, firing in quick, trained bursts. "Stay down," he shouted to Ravina, who had already grabbed a loose chunk of metal to use as a shield. One bandit rushed toward Hirsch, spun and struck him across the face, sending him to the ground. Jake saw it and gave a surprised nod. "You're not helpless," he said, ducking a blast. "I am Valari." She growled, "Not a child." But then, one of the attackers circled behind them, unseen, and raised his rifle at Jake's exposed back. Ravina saw a tan for a moment. Time slowed. She could let the human die. Walk away, and no one would blame her. But her feet moved before her mind finished thinking. She threw the metal shield like a discus, hitting the attacker's weapon just before he fired. The shot missed, burning into the dirt, and Jake spun. Finishing the man with one shot, silence returned as the last of the attackers fled. Jake leaned against a rock, breathing hard, a scorch mark on his armor. "You saved me," he said. Looking at her, confused, Ravina didn't answer right away. She looked at her hands, then at him. And for the first time since they met, she didn't insult him. Instead, she said, "We are not done yet," and walked back to the crawler. Jake followed, a small grin on his lips. She hated humans. Sure, but something just changed, and the road ahead was only getting more dangerous. Asterisk, the wind howled through the broken canyons as Jake guided the half-damaged crawler over the cracked dirt path, its wheels dragging through patches of ash and scorched stone. Ravina sat closer this time, not beside him, but not in the far back either, her arms folded, her sharp eyes scanning the terrain through the windshield. She hadn't said a word since the ambush, not even a thank you. But the silence between them had changed. It wasn't full of hate anymore. Jake's arm was wrapped in a quick field bandage. Burned, but not broken. He winced occasionally, but didn't complain. Ravina noticed, of course, but looked away whenever he caught her watching. By the time the sun dipped low, turning the sky a deep red, the crawler's battery finally gave out. With a soft, dying hum, Jake cursed under his breath and kicked the door open. Stepping into the cold evening air, Ravina followed a moment later, rubbing her arms, her breath clouding in front of her lips. "We'll need shelter," Jake said, nodding toward the nearby rocks. "Storm's coming." "I can feel it," Ravina replied, her voice quieter than before, less like a queen, more like someone simply tired. They found a shallow cave tucked behind jagged boulders, dark and dry, half buried from centuries of windstorms. Inside, Jake set up a heat lantern and unrolled a thin survival blanket. Ravina sat with her back to the wall, arms around her knees. Her dark braid resting over one shoulder, Jake tossed her a protein bar, and she caught it without looking. "You eat this?" she asked, sniffing it with disgust. "Not for the taste," he said, "for staying alive." She took a small bite anyway and chewed in silence. Outside, thunder cracked in the sky, and cold rain began to tap against the rocks. Soon, the temperature dropped. Fast, freezing wind slipping into the cave edges. Jake wrapped himself in half the blanket and shivered slightly. Trying to ignore it, then came the softest voice he'd heard from her. "You're shaking." He looked up. She wasn't mocking. "Not tonight. I'll live," he said, pulling the blanket tighter. She hesitated, then scooted a little closer, sitting beside him, not touching, but near enough to share some warmth. After a long pause, she whispered, "I thought you'd run when they attacked. Why would I do that?" Jake replied, looking into the firelight flickering across her face. "Because that's what I expected from your kind," she admitted, her tone sharp but honest. Jake leaned back against the wall and exhaled slowly. "You think we're all cowards," he said. "I thought most of you were weak," she said, then paused. "But you didn't run, even when you should have." Jake smirked a little, his eyes on the fire. "Maybe I'm just stupid." She almost smiled, almost. He looked at her then. Really looked. She was still fierce, still full of fire, but something softer was buried underneath it now. She caught him staring and turned her head quickly. "What?" "Nothing," Jake said, looking away again. "Just wondering how much longer you're gonna hate me." Ravina was quiet, her fingers slowly tracing the edges of her bracelet-tan old Volari symbol of honor. "Now cracked. I don't hate you," she said finally, and the cave went silent. Only the sound of the rain outside remained. Jake closed his eyes, let out a slow breath, and said nothing more, but deep inside, both of them felt something shift. Not friendship yet, and definitely not trust. But the road between them wasn't. So cold anymore, and tomorrow. It would begin again with more danger waiting just beyond the hills. And a secret neither of them knew was already following them from the shadows. The morning came without a sunrise. Just a dull gray light leaking through the cave mouth, cold and hollow like the silence between them. Jake was already awake, packing the gear in quiet motions. His face tight with focus, Ravina opened her eyes. Slowly, blinking at the fog that rolled over the land like a living thing, neither of them spoke, but both knew today wouldn't be easy. The crawler was dead. And their path had shifted. Now it was foot travel through a borderland forest known for one thing: vanishing patrols. By midday, the forest swallowed them whole. Branches hung low. Strange white moss grew on trees that bent like they were listening. And the ground made no sound beneath their boots. Ravina glanced behind often, her instincts whispering warnings. "We're being watched," she said quietly. Jake nodded. "I know." Still, they kept moving, cutting through tall grass and shadowy vines. Until they found what looked like an old hunting shelter, barely standing, half-eaten by the wild. They decided to stop for a moment, catching breath, checking maps. Jake sat with his back to a broken pillar, Ravina pacing nearby. That's when it happened. The silence shattered with a scream high-pitched, short, and inhuman. Jake was up in a second rifle raised, eyes scanning every shadow. Ravina moved beside him, her own hand gripping a small blade from her boot. Then came another sound, not a scream this time, but something wet dragging against stone, slow and heavy. Whatever it was close. And it didn't care about hiding anymore. Jake motioned for Ravina to get behind him, but she didn't move. "I'm not helpless," she whispered, her eyes sharp and glowing faintly. "I never said you were," Jake answered, keeping his aim steady. Suddenly, a shape lunged from the tall grass. Massive and fast, all claws and black bone armor. Its mouth wide open with layered fangs. Jake fired 3 times, one missed. One hit the shoulder. The third grazed its jaw. The creature roared and slammed into Jake, knocking him back hard. Ravina didn't hesitate. She jumped on its back. Driving her blade into the soft spot behind its neck, it screamed again and threw her off. But the damage was done, not staggered, bleeding, and turned to flee into the trees, disappearing like smoke. Jake sat up, breath shallow, blood dripping from a cut on his forehead. "You okay?" he asked, looking toward her. Ravina was on her knees, coughing but nodded. She crawled over, pulled a cloth from her belt, and pressed it to his head. "You're lucky that thing was slow," she said softly. Jake gave a weak smile. "You're lucky. I had 3 bullets left." They sat like that for a while, her hands shaking slightly, his chest rising and falling in slow pain. Then, without thinking, Ravina whispered, "Why do you keep standing in front of me when danger comes?" Jake didn't answer at first, then said quietly, "Because something tells me. If I fall, you'll stand for both of us." She didn't know what to say to that, but she didn't move her hand from his wound either. Outside, the fog began to lift, but neither noticed the small metal drone watching them from a tree branch above. Its red light blinking softly. Someone or something had just locked onto their location, and what came next would change everything. The wind had shifted, and the forest no longer felt alive, felt alert. Jake limped slightly as they pushed deeper into the thinning trees, his side bruised from the creature's charge. But he never let Ravina see how bad it really was. She walked ahead now, scanning every root, every sound, every flicker of movement. There was something hunting them, and it wasn't just wild beasts anymore. At noon, they reached a broken road, the kind left behind by ancient empires cracked. Stone, rusted signs, forgotten history. Ravina paused by an old pillar, her fingers tracing the faint symbol carved there, her face suddenly unreadable. Jake watched her carefully. You recognize that mark? He asked. She nodded slowly, her voice distant. This used to be one of our holy paths, she said, before the humans came. Before the war, Jake didn't respond, just waited. Ravina looked back at him, then spoke again. Softer this time, my brother. Walked this path when he was chosen for pairing. Pairing. Jake raised an eyebrow. It's like our version of marriage, she explained. Then her eyes narrowed. Don't twist it into something dirty, human. Jake smirked slightly, but nodded. They moved on. The silence between them now, heavy with memory, by evening. The sky turned strange a copper hue, bleeding into purple. And the air felt thick like a storm was watching them. They found a half-collapsed building on the edge of the forest, tall enough to see the plains beyond. Inside, they set up a small camp near a broken window, warm light flickering from Jake's pocket flame. He took out a metal box from his pack and pulled out a photograph, a small one. Worn at the edges, Ravina leaned closer without asking, "Who's that?" She asked, "My sister," Jake said quietly. Her name was Emily. Was? Jake nodded, staring at the picture. She died when I was 16. During the first strikes from your side, he said. She was just a kid. Ravina didn't speak. Jake didn't look up, just kept his voice steady. I wanted revenge so badly. I joined the army the next year. He said, but the more aliens I fought, the more I realized. They weren't all monsters. She looked at him carefully now, her voice thin. And yet you still agreed to guard me, the daughter of the enemy. Jake finally met her eyes, and his voice didn't shake. You're not my enemy anymore, he said, unless you want to be. Ravenna turned away, pretending to brush dust from her arm. Her jaw was tight, her eyes full of something she didn't want to admit. Later, after they shared dry food and cold water, Jake fell asleep, sitting up, his head resting against the wall, but Ravina couldn't sleep. She walked quietly to the window and stared at the plains, her hand resting near the cracked symbol on her bracelet. She whispered something in her native tongue, something like a prayer. Then she heard the noise too soft for human ears, but not for hers. A sharp pulse, electronic, hidden, coming from behind the building. She moved fast, silent, and found it half buried in the rubble. Blinking red, a tracking beacon. Her hands shook as she picked it up. It wasn't human tech, and it wasn't hers. Someone had planted it. Someone was following them, and the worst part, she had a good guess who it was. She looked back at Jake, still asleep, unaware. She held the beacon in her hand, thinking, breathing, heart pounding. She could walk away now, leave him before things got worse, before she got him killed, but something deep inside wouldn't let her, not after everything, not after last night. So instead, she crushed the beacon under her heel, her jaw set, and whispered to herself, if they're coming, they'll have to get through me first. The storm didn't come from the sky, came from the past. They left at dawn, not knowing what was behind them. Only that Ravina's silence had grown heavier, her steps faster, her grip on her blade tighter than before. Jake followed without question, but his instincts screamed louder with every hour. Something was wrong, and she knew it. She just wasn't saying it. By mid-morning, they reached the river, wide, slow-moving current that shimmered like oil, flowing through dead trees and hollow reeds. There was no bridge, just the ruins of one long collapsed, its stone teeth sinking into the mud. Jake scanned the area, boots sinking slightly in the wet earth. We'll have to cross by foot, he said, pointing to the shallow end. No, Ravina said, voice firm, we're not going that way. Jake turned to her, eyebrows drawn. Why not? She didn't answer, but her eyes were on the far ridge. Her body tensed like a coiled wire. That's when they heard the whistle, soft, rhythmic, like a signal. Jake's rifle came up instantly, scanning the horizon. Ravina didn't move. her eyes locked on the trees across the river. From the misstepped figure stall, armored in polished bone plate, the symbol of her clan etched in red across their chest plates, Valari hunters. And they weren't here to protect her. One of them raised a voice amplifier to his mouth. Ravina, of House Solowan by command of the council, return to your bloodline, he declared. Surrender the human. Jake's grip on his weapon tightened. So, this is why you've been so quiet, he said bitterly. I didn't call them. She replied, I swear. Jake didn't believe her at first, and it showed in his face. Then she stepped in front of him, arms wide, her back to him, her voice loud, you'll have to kill me first. She shouted to the hunters, I choose my own path now. The lead hunter narrowed his eyes. Then you are no longer one of us. With a sharp wave of his hand, a shot rang out. Ravina ducked. Jake returned fire, and chaos exploded across the riverbank. Jake grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the shallows, water soaking their legs as plasma bolts burned into the ground behind them. Move, he shouted, dragging her across the river as reeds caught their feet and the current pulled at their balance. She slipped once, he caught her, held her, then pushed her forward again. Blasts echoed behind them as they climbed up the far bank. Gasping for air, clothes soaked, hearts pounding, they didn't stop until they were deep inside the fog again. The sound of chasing footsteps finally fading behind them. Jake collapsed near a rock, his chest heaving. You didn't tell me your own people would try to kill you, he growled, voice rough with pain. I didn't know they'd go this far, she said. Kneeling beside him, I thought they'd try to scare us. Not. Jake pulled away from her hand, breathing hard. You said you didn't hate me anymore, he muttered. But you kept secrets. Ravina looked at him, guilt flashing across her face. I didn't want to believe they'd betray me, she whispered. But I was wrong. She stood up, wiping mud from her hands, her voice harder now. We keep going, she said. And this time, if they follow, we don't run. Jake looked up at her, soaked, angry, and ready to fight. He nodded slowly, a small flicker of something new in his eyes. Then we do it together, he said. Neither of them noticed the small black drone watching from the trees again, its signal now stronger. Its silent message sent. Someone even more dangerous had just been alerted. And they were no longer just being followed. They were being hunted. The rain came without warning, soaking the cracked soil as the wind screamed like a warning in a forgotten language. Jake stumbled again, his body moving slower now. Blood soaking through the ripped edge of his side. Ravina caught him before he fell, her arms under his, dragging him forward step by step. You were supposed to be the strong one, she muttered, breath fogging as she struggled to carry his weight. Jake laughed weakly, voice rough. You're doing fine, princess. Don't call me that. She snapped, but she didn't let him go. They found shelter in the husk of an old transport pod, crashed and left to rot years ago, the metal bent and covered in moss. Inside, the shadows were thick, but dry. Jake collapsed onto a pile of old blankets, coughing, his skin pale beneath the dirt. Ravina moved quickly, tearing open the medkit, hands shaking as she exposed the wound across his ribs. It wasn't clean, and it wasn't small. She stared for a moment, then bit her lip and got to work. Her people were trained in combat. Not care, but she'd watched enough, learned enough to know how to clean, close, and press. He winced under her touch, but said nothing. Just watched her face. You've done this before, he whispered, not for a human. She said without looking at him, but blood is blood. Outside, the storm screamed louder, but inside the pod, everything slowed when she was done. She sat beside him, exhausted, her hands stained red. He looked at her, voice softer now. You didn't have to stay, he said. You could have left me, gone to your people, taken the easy road. Ravenna turned her head, Toward him, her eyes. Unreadable. They're not my people anymore, she said quietly. And the easy road doesn't exist. She hesitated. Then added something barely above a whisper. You protected me when I didn't deserve it. Jake smiled faintly. Now you're stuck with me. A pause hung between them. Heavy with things neither of them had the courage to say. Then movement. Raveena turned sharply, her ears twitching, her body tense. She reached for her blade. But Jake grabbed her wrist gently. Wait, he whispered. Listen. Footsteps, slow, careful, wet against the mud. Not Valari soldiers. Not wild animals. Something else. A low metallic click echoed through the forest outside, the unmistakable sound of high-grade weaponry being primed. Raveena's breath caught in her throat. They've sent bounty units, she said, voice low. Not clan warriors. Hired killers. Jake pulled himself up slowly, his injury forgotten for a moment. Then we don't stay here, he said, gripping his rifle, but it was too late. A blinding flash lit up the pod windows, followed by a cold voice through a speaker. Raveena. Of the fallen house, surrender the human and come out with your hands raised. Her eyes locked with Jake's. If they take you, she said, they won't let you live. Jake nodded. Then I guess we make our stand here. No, she said, standing tall now, her voice sharp and royal again. I'll go out there. What? He hissed, grabbing her arm. You'll get killed. I won't fight, she said, eyes narrowing. I'll talk before he could stop her. She stepped outside into the rain, hands raised, hair plastered to her face, her voice clear. This human is under my protection. She said, You want him? You go through me? Lightning cracked across the sky, but the silence that followed was louder than any storm. The wind died. For a moment, everything was still. Even the rain seemed to pause. Hanging in the air like breath held too long, Raveena stood tall in the open, her soaked cloak clinging to her body, her arms raised high, her voice echoing with the weight of bloodlines and broken oaths. Inside the wrecked pod, Jake held his rifle tight, every muscle tense. Watching through the narrow crack in the metal shell, he didn't trust this, none of it from the tree line. A figure emerged, slow and deliberate, armored in matte black, eyes hidden behind a smooth visor that glowed faint red. Not Valari, not human, pure mercenary, cold and silent. Behind him came three more, fanning out, weapons aimed. No emotions, no names. Raveena didn't move. I said, he's under my protection. She repeated, louder now. The leader tilted his head slightly, almost curious. Then spoke through a filtered voice that buzzed like static. We don't need you. Princess, he said. Just the human. Jake stepped out, rifle raised. Limping but steady. Then come get me, he growled. Raveena's eyes widened. Jake, but he was already beside her, standing in the rain like a broken statue refusing to fall. The mercenaries hesitated. This wasn't how these jobs usually went. One of them stepped forward, raising a pulse. Weapon. Raveena moved first, faster than they expected. A blade drawn from her belt, spinning into the mud and slicing across the weapon's core. Sparks flying, gunfire lit up the clearing, but Jake was already pulling her behind the wreck, diving into the mud, shielding her with his own body. One of the mercs moved in too close. Jake dropped him with two precise shots, but the others were advancing fast. Inside the wreck, Raveena grabbed a thermal charge from Jake's pack. Eyes wild. They want you alive, she said. They won't expect me to. Jake stopped her. If you blow yourself up, I'm not letting you be a hero alone. She stared at him, soaking wet, hair stuck to her cheek, eyes full of something that had nothing to do with war. Then she leaned in, pressed her forehead gently against his, and whispered, You're the first human I've ever believed in. Jake blinked, then grinned despite everything. Worst choice you've ever made. No, she said. The first right one, Together, they burst from the wreck, side by side, firing and dodging. Blades flashing, bullets cracking through the air like thunder. One merc went down, then another. But Jake was hit shoulder this time, spinning. Him to the ground, Ramina screamed and threw herself over him, shielding him with her body, knife in hand, daring anyone to come closer. But they didn't. A distant hum filled the Era transport shuttle, descending fast. Emergency lights flared across the sky, and then silence. The last mercenaries looked up, recognized the insignia, and vanished into the forest without a word. The shuttle landed with a hiss, and from it stepped a figure draped in white armor. Valari High Command. An old woman with glowing eyes approached slowly, her voice like cold glass. "You abandoned your house, Ravina," she said. "But perhaps you found something more powerful." Her gaze shifted to Jake, who coughed, bleeding, but smiled like a soldier who'd won. The woman nodded once. "We will speak again, both of you," she said, then turned and vanished into the shuttle, leaving a small med drone behind. As the drone worked to stop the bleeding, Ravina sat beside Jake, silent. "You saved me." He whispered. "No," she said. "You saved me long before I ever admitted it." She reached out, gently took his hand, and held it, not as a symbol of surrender, but as a promise. The storm passed, and somewhere on that battlefield, destiny quietly changed course, forever.